Long before European ships touched the eastern seaboard, the continent of North America was home to remarkable civilizations. People who shaped the earth itself into great ceremonial mounds, sweeping geometric earthworks, and vast urban settlements. From the intricate burial mounds of the Adena and Hopewell cultures to the towering earthen platforms of the Mississippians at Cahokia. The story of the Pre-Columbian Mound builders reveals a sophisticated world of astronomy, agriculture, trade and ritual. These societies left no written records, but their enduring legacies are carved deep into the land. Today we'll unearth the tales of the people who built monuments from the soil beneath their feet, and in doing so, shaped the spiritual and social landscapes of ancient North America. The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler.
And we're live from the living room as Doug eyes up the match day spread. He's reaching for the buffalo wing. Perfect! Hang on, what's this? Oh, he's gone for a can of Pepsi too! Incredible! What a finish! Sensational combination! Look at the delight on his face. There's no doubt about it. It just tastes better. Match days deserve Pepsi. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a pack of Pepsi Zero Sugar for today's match. It's poetry in motion.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Volume 4, The Medieval World. Episode 91, The Pre-Columbian Mound Builders of North America. Today we're embarking on a journey into one of North America's most enduring archaeological puzzles, the enigmatic earthen mounds. When European explorers first arrived in North America during the so-called Age of Discovery, they encountered something truly bewildering. Enormous earthen mounds scattered across the landscape like clues to a long-forgotten riddle. Some were modest, circular burial mounds known as tumuli, not unlike those found across ancient Eurasia from Britain's own barrows to the great kurgans of the Pontic steppe. But others were far more ambitious. Take, for instance, the Serpent Mound of Ohio, an immense winding effigy of a coiled snake, its sinuous form stretched across a ridgetop in breathtaking precision, truly a sight to behold even today. To the European mind of the 16th and 17th centuries, these structures were utterly baffling. Who built them and how? Surely not the indigenous peoples they had just encountered, people they wrongly and arrogantly assumed to be too primitive for such feats of engineering. Instead, speculation ran wild. Some believed that these were the works of a vanished civilization, perhaps the survivors of Atlantis or a lost tribe of Israel. There were even those who claimed the ancient Phoenicians had been here first, leaving behind these monuments as evidence of a forgotten empire. But, as is so often the case, the truth, once the archaeologists got to work, is far more fascinating than the fables. To begin understanding these mounds, we must wind the clock back tens of thousands of years, perhaps to the period just before, during, or shortly after the last glacial maximum, when the first humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia into what is now Alaska. These early peoples, the ancestors of all indigenous Americans, spread across the continents, developing cultures and technologies in relative isolation from the rest of the world. And in time, these cultures would give rise to earthwork traditions entirely their own. One of the most extraordinary early examples is Poverty Point in present-day Louisiana, dating to around 1700 BCE. Here, massive ridges and mounds were shaped into semicircular patterns surrounding a central plaza. The site was not just a ceremonial centre, but it also revealed clear signs of long-distance trade, with materials sourced from across the eastern United States. Think about this for a moment. Organised trade networks spanning vast distances millenniums ago. Now consider this. The effort required to construct such a complex earthwork site would have demanded organisation, leadership and a surplus of resources. In other words, the kind of community structure often associated with agriculture and permanent settlement. Yet, Poverty Point's inhabitants were still largely hunter-gatherers. So what drove them to build on such a monumental scale? That's a question still debated by experts, but it speaks volumes about their ingenuity and social cohesion. Just when archaeologists thought they had a handle on the timeline, another surprise emerged in the 1990s at a site called Watson Break, also in Louisiana. There, researchers uncovered a complex of mounds and ridges dating to around 3,500 BCE, some 1,500 years older than Poverty Point. That makes Watson Break contemporary with Britain's Stonehenge and even earlier than the Kurgan mound cultures of the Eurasian steppe. Let that sink in for a moment. In the heart of prehistoric North America, hunter-gatherer communities were constructing monumental architecture without the aid of metal tools, beasts of burden, or the wheel. This pushes back the origins of mound building by millenniums and offers a humbling reminder of just how advanced indigenous societies were, long before contact with Europe. It absolutely blows those old, arrogant European assumptions out of the water. What we do know is this. The mound building tradition endured for thousands of years, evolving through the Adena and Hopewell cultures, culminating in the massive platform mounds of the Mississippian era, like the towering Monk's Mound at Cahokia. These weren't isolated incidents, but a continuous, developing tradition. These structures weren't just dirt piled high. They were the centres of communities, the stage for ceremony, the canvas for spiritual expression, and the embodiment of societal order. They represent a mastery of engineering, a profound connection to the land, and a rich spiritual world that we are only just beginning to truly appreciate.
The Adena culture.
One particularly important discovery was made at the site of Adena Mansion, a stately home built in the early 19th century near Chillicothe, Ohio. There, an ancient earthen mound was found, later dubbed Adena Mound. Tragically, the mound was lost to excavation, a fate that would be considered deeply irresponsible by modern archaeological standards. A real shame given its significance. Yet, before its destruction, the mound revealed remarkable secrets. Human remains and grave goods were found within, evidence of social stratification. Certain individuals, likely tribal leaders, spiritual figures, or esteemed warriors, had been buried with far greater care and ceremony than others. This suggests that even at this early stage, Adena communities were not entirely egalitarian. Hierarchy, ritual, and remembrance played a vital role in how they viewed death and life. As similar sites with shared characteristics were unearthed across the region, archaeologists began using the term Adena culture as a broader label. Though centred on the Ohio Valley, traces of Adena cultural influence stretch impressively far as present-day New Brunswick in Canada. What's particularly interesting about the Adena is that they don't function as a centralised nation. There was no Adena kingdom or ruling elite over vast territories. Instead, what we appear to be looking at is a network of interconnected tribes, communities linked by shared customs, mutual influences, and regional interaction. It's a bit like a prehistoric federation, not ruled but related. And that's precisely what makes it so fascinating. It challenges our often Eurocentric notions of how complex societies must be organised. By around 600 BCE, these groups were displaying increasing sophistication in their agricultural practices. Now, just to be clear, this wasn't the first appearance of farming in the region. Domestication of crops had begun much earlier, but what becomes evident during the Adena period is a noticeable intensification. Communities became more reliant on cultivated plants, with surplus food supporting population growth, ritual practices, and specialised craftsmanship. A real step change in their way of life. Perhaps the most striking element of Adena society lies in its burial traditions. Some mounds were simple, functional resting places. Others were far more elaborate. In some, wooden chambers or ceremonial platforms were erected before being covered with layers of earth. The use of red ochre, often sprinkled over the dead, hints at a ritualistic understanding of death, a tradition that echoes across time and cultures from ancient Europe to the indigenous peoples of Australia. It's a universal human practice, almost. In some cases, the dead were carefully arranged, possibly in alignment with celestial events such as solstices or lunar cycles. Others were cremated, while a few appear to have had their bones rearranged post-mortem, perhaps in a kind of secondary burial rite. These practices suggest a world view in which the spirit lived on, and a transition from life to death was marked with deep ceremonial significance, far from primitive. And the mounds weren't just places of rest, they were time capsules of ancient connectivity. Within them, archaeologists have discovered artifacts from hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away. Copper tools, intricate stone carvings, and even seashells from the Gulf Coast. These weren't mere trinkets, they were markers of a vast trading network, one that moved goods, ideas and people across the prehistoric landscape. Trade wasn't simply transactional, it was cultural glue, fostering alliances and a shared sense of identity among distant communities. It speaks volumes about the interconnectedness of those early North American societies. As the Adena influence spread, their monuments became larger and more complex. Some mounds evolved into circular enclosures, perhaps used for seasonal gatherings, religious rites, or communal storytelling. Their enduring presence on the landscape tells us not only about the people who built them, but about the social fabric that connected them across regions and generations. These structures were not just dirt and labour, they were acts of devotion to the dead, to the heavens, and to each other. A truly remarkable legacy etched into the very earth.
The Hopewell tradition.
As the story of the Adena culture reaches its height, we witness the emergence of something altogether more ambitious. The Hopewell tradition. Now, the word tradition here is going to do a lot of heavy lifting. Historians and archaeologists alike tend to avoid calling the Hopewell a single culture or civilization because it wasn't centralized, unified, or even consistent in its customs. Instead, what we see is a network, a movement that spanned enormous distances, stretching from the forests of southern Canada all the way to the Florida panhandle. This was not so much an empire, but an era of influence, a cultural web that radiated outward from its heartland in the Ohio River Valley. From the end of the first millennium BCE through to the middle of the first millennium CE, the art of mound building took a notable leap forward. These weren't just simple heaps of earth anymore. Hopewell mounds featured timber frameworks, clay floors, and expertly constructed chambers. Some of them crypt-like in design, a real step up in complexity. The grave goods found within them, a fascinating mix of locally made objects and exotic imports. This blending of near and far strongly suggests that the Hopewell weren't just continuing the practices of the Adena, they were expanding upon them, both culturally and technologically. In fact, some archaeologists refer to this as the Adena-Hopewell continuum, a gradual evolution rather than an abrupt change. Burial practices, however, remained wonderfully varied. Some mounds contained the remains of multiple individuals, others just one. And who were these people, buried with such care and splendour? A king, a warrior, a priest, or someone altogether different? The mounds, as ever, guard their secrets well. Among the more curious artefacts found in Hopewell burials are ceremonial pipes, a tradition they inherited from their Adena predecessors. But these weren't simply decorative. There's good reason to believe that the tobacco they smoked was highly hallucinogenic, and that its use was part of shamanic ritual. Imagine, if you will, a spiritual figure seated in a timber chamber, pipe in hand, inhaling sacred smoke to enter a trance-like state, a gateway perhaps to the world of the spirits. Similar practices have been found in ancient South American cultures, and the parallels are difficult to ignore. It seems the Hopewell were not only engineers and artists, but spiritual explorers as well, seeking deeper connections with the unseen world. Travelling south from the Ohio heartland, we encounter the Copena culture, centred in what is now northwest Alabama and extending into Mississippi and Tennessee. The name Copena is actually a blend of two materials often found in their artefacts, copper and galena, the latter being a shiny lead mineral used for decoration and ceremonial use. Within the Copena mortuary complex, archaeologists uncovered about 50 burial mounds brimming with jewellery, ear spools, bracelets, beadwork, all crafted from shell, copper and stone. Despite their geographical distance from Ohio, these southern communities remained firmly linked to the Hopewell tradition, likely persisting from the Adena period right through to its Hopewellian peak, demonstrating that widespread influence we discussed earlier. Now, let's head north again into Kentucky, where the crab orchard culture thrived. What sets them apart is their pottery, distinctive fabric-impressed designs that are both beautifully and functionally crafted. These people weren't merely participants in the Hopewell exchange. They were skilled artisans with their own flair, creating objects of true beauty. Positioned at the centre of a wide trade network, the crab orchard communities would have engaged in frequent contact with other Hopewellian groups. But they also left behind something quite strange, an earthwork that, rather intriguingly, resembles a tuning fork. Its precise purpose remains unknown, but its sheer uniqueness certainly adds to the mystery of Hopewell monuments. Perhaps they were sending signals to the heavens. Further northwest in present-day Illinois, we find the Havana culture, another important offshoot of the Hopewell tradition. Just over the border in Iowa lies the Toolsboro Mound group, dating back roughly 2,000 years, right around the start of the first millennium CE. What's curious here is what we don't find: nearby villages. Despite clear signs of ceremonial activity, there's little evidence that anyone lived directly beside the mounds. This strongly suggests that these structures were not residential, but reserved for gatherings, spiritual ceremonies, and perhaps seasonal events. Think of them as sacred ground, places one might journey to rather than live upon, a kind of ancient pilgrimage site, if you will. From the Ohio heartlands to the Gulf Coast, and from Kentucky's pottery kilns to Illinois' sacred earthworks, the Hopewell tradition was far more than a collection of regional customs. It was a continent-spanning phenomenon, a movement that connected people through ritual, trade, technology and belief. They engineered the land, they built monuments to the dead, they crafted objects of great beauty, and they sought meaning in smoke, stone and sky. Our journey now takes us further west to what is often considered the far edge of the Hopewell tradition, the homeland of the Kansas City culture. Centered primarily in what is now Missouri, with its influence spilling into Kansas, this culture marks the westernmost frontier of the Hopewellian world. Now, unlike many other Hopewell groups whose legacy lies buried beneath ceremonial mounds, archaeologists here have uncovered something more personal: villages, everyday life. Evidence of how these people lived, and not just how they honoured the dead. That gives us a much richer picture. From these excavations, a picture emerges of a hybrid way of life. They were farmers, certainly, but they also hunted and gathered, drawing from a broad and sustainable range of food sources. Their pottery, much like that of other Hopewellian groups, is decorated with fine punctuations and carved patterns distinctive, shared signatures of a wider cultural family. And though the Kansas City culture sat at the furthest reaches of Hopewell influence, they were still part of the conversation, trading, sharing and evolving alongside their eastern counterparts. They may have been on the edge of the map, but they certainly weren't out of the loop. And now to one of the most astonishing sights in all of North America, the Serpent Mound, coiled across the landscape in Adams County, Ohio. This giant earthen effigy, stretching an astonishing 400 metres, is believed to be the largest serpent effigy in the world. Its head aligns with the summer solstice sunset, while its body curves in rhythmic undulations, almost as if slithering across the ridge above Ohio Bush Creek. It's a truly breathtaking piece of land art. Unlike other mounds we've discussed, this isn't a burial site. It's something else, something more enigmatic. Early estimates placed the mound at around 1,000 years old, but more recent research has challenged that. There's growing evidence that the site may date back to the Hopewell period itself, or that the location was already sacred long before the serpent ever took shape. This really throws a spanner in the works of our understanding. If that's true, we're looking not just at a piece of art or engineering, but at a layered ceremonial site, reinterpreted across generations. The serpent may be ancient, but its meaning may be far older still. A truly compelling mystery. As we move into the first centuries of the Common Era, Hopewellian traditions began to migrate, flowing downriver, across woodland and into the distant southeastern reaches of the continent. By around 100 CE, we find signs of these influences as far afield as Alabama and Georgia, where the Swift Creek culture began to take shape. Like their northern cousins, the Swift Creek people produced intricately decorated pottery, so distinctive in fact that their ceramic style remains one of the main ways we identify them today. But were they a continuation of the Hopewell tradition, a local adaptation, or simply a parallel culture with shared traits? Scholars are still debating that very question. The subtleties of cultural diffusion are endlessly fascinating. What is clear is that the Swift Creek people were more mobile, more nomadic than the settled Hopewell communities to the northwest. Meanwhile, over on the Gulf Coast, the Marksville culture was flourishing, particularly in what is now Louisiana, but extending into Mississippi and Arkansas. In contrast to the Swift Creek lifestyle, the Marksville people built permanent settlements, some of them quite large, and took part in a vibrant trade network. Their burial sites tell a familiar story. Pipes, ornaments, figurines, and marine artifacts like shells and pearls, gifts of the sea, carefully placed beside the dead. The diversity of practice should come as no surprise. After all, we wouldn't expect uniformity across all of Europe or the ancient Near East, so why should we expect it across the vast and varied landscapes of prehistoric North America? It is a continent after all. Let's pause for a moment and consider the bigger picture. Around 2,000 years ago, while Rome was expanding across Europe, North America had no written records, no Julius Caesar, no scrolls or inscriptions. What we do have is the archaeological record, layers of earth and artifact, slowly revealing their stories. We don't know these people's names. We can't quote their poets. But we can study their homes, their tools, their art, and their sacred sites. What we uncover must always be interpreted carefully, because the past doesn't speak in certainties. It whispers through evidence, and it's our job to try and hear those whispers as clearly as possible. One thing is certain, Trade connected these people, from the copper of the Great Lakes to the shells of the Gulf. Goods moved far and wide. But who organised this trade? Did Ohio, the heartland of the Adena and Hopewell cultures, act as a central hub? Did goods move through travelling merchants or via a chain of local exchanges passed from hand to hand? And what about leadership? Was there a centralised ruler, a kind of pre-Columbian monarch overseeing multiple villages? Or were things more egalitarian, with each community governed by its own chief or council? Burial mounds give us some clues. Those interred with prestige goods, jewellery, pipes, sacred tools were clearly respected figures, perhaps spiritual leaders, chieftains, or even something akin to royalty. But the absence of written testimony means we can only speculate. It's a puzzle we're still piecing together. One of the most tantalising mysteries of the Hopewell ceremonial life is the so-called Great Hopewell Road, a straight tree-lined corridor that appears to stretch some 60 miles between the major earthworks near Chillicothe and Newark, Ohio. Only fragments of this road have survived, but its precision and direction suggest it wasn't just a path. It may have been a sacred route used for pilgrimage, ceremony, or grand procession. It's no coincidence that both the Serpent Mound and the Alligator Effigy Mound, yes, there's an alligator too, though less famous, are situated along this general axis. Although these animal-shaped mounds appear to be centuries younger than the peak of the Hopewell tradition, it's entirely possible that the land beneath them was already held sacred. That generations of people had already walked these hills with reverence, long before an effigy was etched into the earth. It's a remarkable testament to the enduring power of place. So, what does all this tell us? The Hopewell tradition wasn't a single people or polity. It was a network of ideas stretching from Canada to the Gulf, from the plains to the Atlantic coast. It was a time of monumental ambition, of shared rituals, of artistic excellence, and mystical landscapes shared by human hands. They left no written words, but their earthworks, pottery and pathways continue to speak. And if we listen closely, we might just hear the echoes of ancient voices still resonating across the land they shaped 2,000 years ago.
Troyville and Coles Creek.
Though the era of the Hopewell tradition eventually came to a close, the art of mound building didn't disappear. It endured, shaping the ancient landscapes of North America for centuries to come. One of the cultures to carry this legacy forward was the Troyville culture, a direct successor to the Marksville culture, which, as you may recall, was known for its sizable settlements spread across what is now Louisiana. The Troyville culture emerged during the middle of the first millennium CE, coexisting with the Baytown culture, which was located further north along the Mississippi River Valley. But here's where things take a curious turn. Those large centralised settlements that once defined the Marksville era began to shrink. But why? Well, scholars have proposed a few intriguing theories. It may have been due to declining agricultural yields, perhaps from over-farming or subtle shifts in the climate. Others suggest that larger communities simply broke apart, splintering into smaller, more sustainable settlements that were better adapted to their environments. A fascinating example of societal flexibility. Despite this decentralisation, farming remained a core part of daily life, and just like their Hopewellian forebears, the people of Troyville continued to hunt, gather and fish, maintaining a varied and reliable food supply. A diversified diet is often a resilient one. Mound building remained central to ceremonial life, and one of the more awe-inspiring examples stood at Jonesville, Louisiana, beside the winding waters of the Black River. This was the site of the Troyville earthworks, a grand complex of mounds, now mostly lost to history, sadly. At the heart of this site was a truly towering achievement, a mound that once rose to a staggering 82 feet, that's around 25 metres, making it the second tallest known Pre-Columbian mound in North America, second only to the colossal Monk's Mound at Cahokia. Tragically, most of the structure was destroyed in the 19th century, its materials carted off and reused in construction projects. A lamentable loss for archaeology. But from what we know, this was no ordinary pile of earth. The mound featured 3 distinct construction layers, which made it structurally comparable to Mesoamerican pyramids. This wasn't just monumental architecture, it was meticulously engineered, incorporating a range of materials and sophisticated building techniques, a feat not just of size but of design. Truly impressive. In the wake of the Troyville culture came a new chapter, the rise of the Coles Creek culture, which marked a shift towards greater social complexity. Thriving in the river valleys of Louisiana, the Coles Creek people led lives that were both productive and adaptable, farming, hunting, gathering and fishing. Yet they never became fully reliant on agriculture. They kept their options open, so to speak, maintaining a broad subsistence strategy. Mound building continued, but the meaning behind the mounds began to change. Where once mounds were primarily ceremonial or used for elite burials, Coles Creek sites start to show signs of a more stratified society. In many cases, mass burials lack the ritual care or symbolism seen in earlier traditions. Meanwhile, certain individuals were laid to rest with ornate grave goods, items sourced through long-distance trade routes, indicating their high status. But here's the twist. Despite those markers of emerging hierarchy, the Coles Creek world wasn't entirely rigid. There's evidence to suggest that some egalitarian values persisted. Take the burial practices, for example. The way someone was buried often depended on their age, not just their wealth or political clout. That suggests society where respect for elders and community roles may have mattered just as much, if not more, than material status. A fascinating balance of social structures.
Mississippian cultures.
Now we're journeying into the 7th and 8th centuries, a period when a new cultural force began to stir across the heartlands of North America. These are the Mississippian cultures, rising alongside the final phases of the Coles Creek tradition and leaving behind an indelible mark on the continent's pre-Columbian past. Stretching across the southeastern United States and up through the mid-continent, their influence was wide-reaching, but nowhere more visible or more extraordinary than at Cahokia, a sprawling ancient city in present-day Illinois, just across the river from modern-day St. Louis. At the centre of Cahokia rises a true marvel of ancient engineering, Monk's Mound. Towering at over 30 metres high, it remains the tallest pre-Columbian earthwork in North America. Archaeologists believe a large structure once sat atop its summit, perhaps a temple or a palace or even an administrative seat of power. But Monk's Mound is just the beginning. The wider Cahokia Mounds complex covers over 5 square miles, with hundreds of mounds carefully planned and arranged. The sheer scale is breathtaking. At its peak, Cahokia may have supported a population of 20,000 or more, making it one of the largest urban centres in North America at the time, comparable in size to some of the great cities of medieval Europe. Think London or Paris, but built from earth. This was not a sleepy village. It was a bustling metropolis, alive with ceremony, commerce, and complex social order. The Mississippian world was shaped by rivers, the arteries of trade, communication, and life. From the Mississippi to the Ohio and beyond, these societies thrived in fertile valleys, leaving behind artifacts that hint at their beliefs, rituals, and rivalries. Grave goods from this period include weapons, suggesting that warrior culture was alive and well, and very likely esteemed. But these weren't just any warriors. Among the Mississippians' most intriguing relics are copper plaques depicting otherworldly beings, twisted, almost alien figures thought to be either mythological, ceremonial, or perhaps spiritual in nature. Could these images represent gods, spirits, or something else entirely? A truly captivating mystery. Some scholars speculate that Mississippian warriors may have served dual roles as spiritual leaders, even priests, and that's still a matter of academic debate. What's clearer is that mounds like Monk's Mound were not merely monuments, they were platforms for buildings, temples, council houses, perhaps even palaces. They were the beating hearts of Mississippian communities. A cornerstone of Mississippian success was maize agriculture. Corn became not just a dietary staple but a symbol of stability, allowing large communities to flourish and freeing up labour for craft, trade and leadership. It was the engine of their civilization. But with agriculture came hierarchy. Unlike the relatively egalitarian Coles Creek societies, Mississippian cultures show clear signs of social stratification. Larger centres such as Cahokia appear to have dominated smaller satellite communities, possibly exerting control through trade, tribute or even military force. Interestingly, however, despite their size and organisation, Mississippian trade networks may have been less efficient than those of their Hopewellian predecessors. Why? One likely reason is conflict. Rising tensions between neighbouring groups may have disrupted cooperation, undermining the flow of goods and information. In other words, progress brought not just prosperity, but also pressure, a timeless tale. Now, here's where things become uniquely valuable to historians. Unlike earlier mound-building cultures, the Mississippians were actually encountered by early European explorers, and those explorers, often missionaries, soldiers, or traders, left behind written accounts. These early descriptions mention warrior cults, spiritual ceremonies, and hierarchical societies, which align remarkably well with archaeological interpretations. So while we should always approach colonial records with caution, they do offer a rare glimpse into Native American life through the eyes of outsiders witnessing it in real time. A fascinating, if sometimes biased, window into the past. In that sense, the Mississippians straddled two worlds. They are both prehistoric and historic, bridging the gap between oral tradition and written record, a truly pivotal point in North American history.
Fort Ancient Culture.
Let's journey north from the Mississippian heartlands to discover another remarkable civilization that emerged across North America, the Fort Ancient culture. Centred in what is now southern Ohio, their influence stretched towards the modern borders with Kentucky and West Virginia. Although they coexisted with the mighty Mississippians, the Fort Ancient people followed a distinct path. Like their southern neighbours, they relied heavily on maize, that all-important staple of pre-Columbian agriculture. Yet their social structure appears to have been less rigid. There's little evidence of the kind of top-down hierarchy or monumental elite burials that we associate with the Mississippian chieftains. So, how did they govern themselves? Was leadership more communal or simply less centralised? Did prestige arrive through service rather than inherited power? These are the fascinating questions that continue to intrigue archaeologists. Perhaps the most striking legacy of the Fort Ancient culture is the Serpent Mound, an enormous earthwork in Adams County, Ohio, shaped in the form of a winding snake. At over 400 metres long, it coils dramatically along the bluff above a stream valley, facing a mysterious egg-shaped feature at its head. It's truly a sight to behold and a testament to ancient artistry and belief. Today, the Serpent Mound is one of the most iconic ancient monuments in North America, and it's generally attributed to the Fort Ancient culture. However, some archaeologists believe that the site may have held ceremonial significance as early as the Hopewell era, nearly 1,000 years earlier. If true, the Fort Ancient people may have been building upon a sacred landscape, layering new meaning atop ancient memory. A continuous spiritual connection perhaps. And the serpent isn't alone. The alligator mound, another effigy structure, is also linked to the Fort Ancient tradition. Whether it truly represents an alligator or another mythical creature altogether is still up for debate. Intriguingly, both mounds may align with the so-called Great Hopewell Road, a theorised ceremonial route believed to have stretched across parts of Ohio. While trade between settlements continued during this period, it appears to have been less expansive than during the earlier Hopewell peak, perhaps a sign of changing priorities or increased regionalism among indigenous communities. A shift in the cultural landscape, you could say. The Fort Ancient people were masters of the Three Sisters agricultural system, growing maize, beans and squash in tandem, a clever technique that supported both soil health and dietary diversity. It's a testament to their sophisticated understanding of their environment. Compared to their ancestors, they seem to have relied less on hunted meat, suggesting that farming had taken centre stage. Still, they weren't lacking in weaponry. In fact, one of the era's biggest innovations was the adoption of the bow and arrow, which gradually replaced the spear and atlatl. This new tool offered greater precision and efficiency, transforming both hunting and warfare across the region. And then, quite suddenly, the Fort Ancient culture disappears from the archaeological record. Unlike other Native American societies who were still thriving during the early colonial era, the Fort Ancient people seem to have vanished by the time European settlers arrived in force. So, what happened? One prevailing theory points to disease, specifically epidemics introduced by Europeans, possibly spread through trade networks before direct contact ever occurred. Smallpox, measles, and other illnesses may have swept through these communities, leaving devastation in their wake. But the truth is, we don't know for certain. There is little concrete evidence of sustained contact between fought ancient peoples and Europeans. No treaties, no battles, no journals recording encounters. Just the sudden silence of a once thriving culture. It's one of the more puzzling disappearances in the story of indigenous North America. A poignant mystery that still haunts the historical landscape. And yet, the fought ancient people have not been forgotten. Their legacy lives on in the mounds that they shaped, the fields they planted, and the artifacts uncovered from beneath the soil. These were societies of innovation, of resilience, and of deep cultural memory, woven into a landscape that had already seen thousands of years of human life before Europeans ever set foot on the continent.
The Plaquemine culture.
Earlier in the episode, we delved into the Troyville and Coles Creek cultures, whose ceremonial mounds and agricultural prowess shaped the lands we now know as Louisiana. But as we leap forward in time, a pressing question remains. Who was living in these regions by the time Europeans arrived in the Americas? As we've already explored, Mississippian cultures held sway across much of the southeastern and central United States, while the fought ancient peoples flourished further north in and around present-day Ohio. Yet Louisiana, with its rich alluvial soils and winding riverways, was still home to its own complex societies. Chief among them was the Plaquemine culture, often seen as the direct continuation of the Coles Creek tradition. Alongside them, to the west in East Texas, another group, the Caddo culture, emerged, more closely aligned with Mississippian customs, particularly in their architectural and spiritual practices. The Plaquemine people were prolific mound builders, carrying forward the ceremonial traditions of their ancestors. Their sacred centres were often arranged with two mounds flanking a central plaza, a layout that suggests that they were not merely burial sites, but spaces of ritual, governance and public life. Think of them as the civic and spiritual heart of their communities. Their mounds weren't simply heaps of soil. Over time they became layered and complex, with new mounds built atop earlier ones, sometimes forming tiered structures not dissimilar in appearance to stepped pyramids seen in Mesoamerican civilizations. A truly remarkable architectural progression. Intriguingly, archaeologists have uncovered shallow graves within some of these mounds, believed by some to be temporary resting places. The theory goes that individuals were initially buried there, only to be relocated or reinterred during later ceremonies. In some cases, only skulls remain, prompting debate. Were these sites used for ritual sacrifice? Were they shrines? Or were the missing remains buried elsewhere in accordance with unknown customs? The past, as ever, holds its secrets close. Whatever the case, these were not casual burials. The discovery of grave goods, including items crafted from exotic materials, points to a culture with long-distance trade links, rich spiritual beliefs, and a profound reverence for the dead. As we journey across the ancient American landscape, one thing becomes clear. The plains, woodlands and river valleys of what is now the United States were home to a vibrant tapestry of indigenous cultures. These societies evolved, more gradually perhaps than the empires of Eurasia, but no less meaningfully. Despite being geographically isolated from Europe, Asia and Africa, they followed strikingly similar paths. The adoption of agriculture led to sedentary living and eventually to social hierarchies. Burials, ceremonial sites and sacrificial rituals reflected a shared human impulse to honour the dead and to make sense of the spiritual realm. The crafting of ceremonial weapons, metal goods and ornamental artefacts echoed practices found throughout the ancient world. These weren't backwaters. These were complex, organised societies evolving in parallel with their counterparts across the oceans. It truly expands our understanding of global human development. The arrival of Europeans in the Americas is often portrayed as a straightforward tale of conquest, but the reality is far more nuanced. Yes, there was violence. There was devastation, particularly from disease and dispossession. But in those earliest encounters, something else was also happening, a mutual recognition. The first European explorers quickly discovered that trade was often more effective than force. They encountered societies that understood hierarchy, valued diplomacy, cultivated the land with care, and honoured their ancestors with ritual and ceremony. They were not encountering a blank slate, but established, sophisticated civilizations. Despite being separated by oceans and millenniums, both worlds had solved the same fundamental challenges. How to feed growing populations, how to organise communities, how to find meaning in a vast and mysterious universe. The encounter between old world and new was not merely one of steel and fire. It was an extraordinary moment in human history, when two independently evolved civilizations met and for a fleeting time glimpsed something familiar in the other. A reminder that, wherever we come from, we are all in the end storytelling, farming, community building humans seeking understanding, security, and a place within the great unfolding story of the world.
So good, so good, so good.
New markdowns up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Stock up and save big on shoes, tops, dresses, accessories, and more must-haves for summer. Join the Nordy Club to unlock exclusive discounts, shop new arrivals first, and more. Plus, buy online and pick up at your favorite Rack store for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
Thank you very much indeed for listening to this episode of the History of the World podcast about the Pre-Columbian Mound builders of North America. Now, this was an episode originally written 2 years ago as a special episode and a thank you to History of the World podcast Illuminati member Larry Pollack. Now, Larry had made the correct contributions to the podcast through Patreon in order to qualify to commission an episode on the subject of his choice, and what a great subject he chose. Now, a little bit more about this episode. It was enhanced, so this wasn't the original script. It's been significantly enhanced with a bit of extra research and a bit of assistance from artificial intelligence in order to bulk it out a bit and make it much more informative. The original episode, if you're a subscriber to the History of the World podcast on Spotify, then you can access the original episode. And if you look back through the archive, it was published in May of 2023. So go back and listen to the original episode that was especially written for Larry. Now, if you enjoy the podcast generally, if you have an appreciation for the podcast, and you'd like to help me to produce the podcast, if you'd like to contribute and enable me to be able to devote more time and resources to the podcast, then please visit our website, click on the Patreon link and sign up to make a monthly contribution. You, like Larry, can become a lifelong member of the History of the World podcast Illuminati and qualify for such gifts and rewards. You can follow this podcast on social media. So it's we have a presence on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Tumblr, Threads and Mastodon, and I'm always very, very keen to hear your feedback. So what did you think of this latest episode about the pre-Columbian North American mound builders? Did I do a good job of summarizing everything, or did I miss anything out? Was there anything you would have liked to have heard more about? Please do write in. The email address is historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com, and your feedback will be discussed during one of our History of the World podcast debrief episodes. Now, thank you for your patience. I know the episodes haven't been coming as thick and fast as they have done in the past. But I may get the opportunity to talk more about that during one of the debrief episodes. But next time on the History of the World podcast, we will be discussing the Mississippian culture. So we'll be digging deeper into that particular mound building culture, that particular tradition, and exploring a bit more about the site of Cahokia, this fascinating North American site. But until then, thanks for listening, and as always, be good.
The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler. Please consider making a financial contribution by going to the historyoftheworldpodcast.com website and clicking on the Patreon link. Email the show at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. And don't forget to join our social media at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Tumblr. See you next time.